Welcome to today's meeting of Democrats of Greater Tucson. My name is Larry Bodine. I'm the president of Democrats of Greater Tucson, and I will be your host today. Our speaker is Stephen Kozachik. Steve, give us a wave.
Artie, it's great to be here.
All right, it's great to have you. I'll give you a short introduction in just a moment, but we start our meetings with a couple of quick announcements. Let's turn to Kathy Ramage-White, who is our membership director.
Bottom line is there's 33 of you now, 34 of you now, and I'm glad you're here, but some of you are not yet members. So let's join us up. It's a great group. It's all Dems and we can chat with each other. If you were here in the beginning, you heard some folks chatting with each other, and it's fun. It's fun to hang out with other Dems. So that's good stuff. So join on up, go to the DGT.org. And when you flip in there, it'll say join now, and you do it through Act Blue. So have a good time, enjoy listening, and I'll give this back to Larry then. Larry?
Well, thank you very much, Kathy. Let's turn to Sandy Binion, our program director, who can tell us about meetings that are coming up.
Anyway, thank you, Steve, for agreeing to speak today. You were very fast in responding to me, and I appreciate that. So coming up, next week, we're going to have Tim Seller, who is a political writer for our Daily Star. And then following that, Juan Padeas, who is the candidate for City Council in Ward 3. As you remember, that City Councilman has resigned. Then coming up after that, we have Joyce Jones-Ivy, who is the only Democrat on the Oro Valley City Council. And following that, we have Akima Oilabola, who is title is acting mayor of South Tucson, and he tells me that really means that he's the vice mayor, that's how they named it many years ago. And following him will be Kristen Engel, who is, of course, on the state senate for LD10. So we have a good lineup coming up, and I've got others I'm trying to get in touch with to speak after that. So welcome.
All right, thank you, Sandy. I have a quick announcement to make, and it comes in the background of the fact that with 75% of people over age 65 vaccinated, more and more people are going out to public activities, and venues such as The Loft is going to be open for movies on May 7th. A meditation center I go to is going to be open on May 10th, and there are more in-person meetings planning to be held. And in light of that, the Board of Democrats of Greater Tucson has been considering the idea of adding live in-person meetings back at the Kettle again, in addition to Zoom. We would continue with Zoom and have live meetings as well. At least that's the idea. And so keep an eye out on your email inbox, because you're going to receive a link to a survey. We want to get the opinion of DGT members on whether they would come to a live in-person meeting, if they would continue to attend on Zoom. And we wanted to hear from you before we made any decisions. So with that, let's get to our speaker. Today we have Steve Kozachik, who has served on the City Council since 2009, and he's running for re-election this year. Steve has a bachelor's degree in public administration and a master's degree in higher education management, both awarded by the University of Arizona. And he previously worked at the UA Athletics Department after a 32-year career in project management and event operations. The primary election is coming up later this year on August 3rd, and Steve is the incumbent who is facing Miranda Schubert, who you may remember addressed DGT back in March 29th, as well as Andres Portela, who will be speaking at our meeting on June 7th. So today, Steve has agreed to discuss ongoing challenges that Tucson faces. That includes the expansion of 5G towers and the telecom industry, It includes harmful PFA chemicals and water issues and the upcoming RTA Next ballot initiative measure. And with that, Steve, the floor is yours.
Okay, great. Yeah, that's a short list. There's a lot going on right now. It's great to see everybody. And Larry, as you were indicating, there's a kind of a slow reopening to the city right now. We're watching the COVID numbers. I keep track of them daily. Today we had 62 new cases in Pima County, and that's on the heels of last week being one of the highest total weekly totals in the last 4 or 5 weeks. So unfortunately, we're not on a continuous off ramp yet. One of the other challenges is that we have excess vaccinations available now. The U of A pod on campus has seen a decline in people going to get vaccinated, and so it's a challenge to reach out. Last night, I had helped the Islamic Center. I helped the Islamic Center of Tucson get a vaccination site, a mobile site through Pima County Health, and they had Arabic translators on site. And so we're trying to reach out into those pockets in the city and in the county where the difficult to reach populations are, so we can make sure that when we do the full-blown reopening, that people are doing it in a safe fashion. First of all, these are really incredibly important positions, the city council. I'm going to go through a few issues that I've championed in the last 10 or 11 years. Unraveling complex public policy questions are never an either or. They're always a both and, or they're always complex questions that affect people's quality of life. These are very, very full-time jobs if done correctly. I invest 10 plus hours a day, literally 7 days a week at this job. And I'm offering that level of energy and commitment to advocacy for another term. So let me just dive into to some of the issues. Many of them I hope you remember. They'll give you an example or a series of examples of the really broad array of things that I've kind of dipped into in the last 10 or 11 years. When I started this in 2009, the city was on the verge of buying into a $200 million downtown convention center hotel. If you'll recall, that was kind of in vogue back then. Lots of cities were doing it. The city of Tucson was going to backstop the bonds. And as we found out shortly thereafter, that market imploded, and cities all over the country were looking for ways to divest from that. At the time, I was saying, let's hit singles and doubles and not try and swing for the fence. In fact, that's what we've been doing. And since 2010, we now have had over $500 million of private sector investment in the downtown core. We've got 4 or 5 hotels either up and running or in the process, and we've got a great retail and commercial environment in the downtown core as well as other than simply students and bars. We've got mixed use housing, and it's really a vibrant situation. When I started this, we had a $40 million deficit, and now we've got a healthy reserve fund. So we've really made a lot of progress, and every major city that is successful in the country has a vibrant downtown core. And so I'm proud to say that that's something that I sunk my teeth into on day one, and we're still seeing the benefits of it. Another issue that has been a challenge, and Larry mentioned the RTA, but this is an RTA project that the Broadway Widening, that when it came to us, the voters in 2006 approved a 150-foot wide 8-lane freeway down Broadway from Euclid to Country Club that pinched down into 2 lanes when you enter the downtown core. The traffic projections did not justify that level of investment, $76 million investment, and so over a 5-year period, joining arms with multiple citizens throughout the community and neighbors along the downtown, along the Broadway corridor, we were able to skinny that up, not frankly to the point that I would have preferred to see it, but we were able in the process to salvage over 100 historic properties, largely on the north side of Broadway. And right now we're in the process of working with Rio Nuevo and a group called Project for Public Spaces on creating an overlay that's called the Sunshine Mile District Overlay that will run from Broadway to Euclid, I mean Country Club to Euclid. And the overlay, once it's in place, will highlight preservation, historic preservation, commercial nodes, walkable, bikeable, neighborhood scale commercial nodes, transit-oriented development. I see Barbara Warren on. She'll see that recognize transit as being one of the highest polluters in the region. And if we, to the extent that we can get people out of their cars into mass transit on bicycles and create a walkable environment, that's the goal for the Sunshine Mile District. And we will also have a component. It'll be the first overlay in the city that will have an affordable housing component built into it. So it's taken a lot of work. I'm proud of the effort, and I'm proud of our neighbors who have really pitched in and offered their suggestions. If we had gone forward with the original Broadway widening corridor, we would have lost 150 businesses on the north side of the street that, quite frankly, are the tax base that funds the RTA. So it never made sense. The traffic projections were out of date the day we started the discussions, and so we've made a lot of progress there. Another area that I've championed is gun control. I saw Tony Zinman on, and Tony's a member of Moms Demand Action. He will recognize the work I did in bringing a gun buyback to the city several years ago. We took off the street over $11,000 worth of firearms, one $50 Safeway gift card at a time. The state legislature soon thereafter banned these. Well, they didn't ban them, but what they said is that if the city takes guns now, you have to sell them back into circulation. So they effectively banned them. Not wanting to be the state's arms dealer, I brought to the city council a resolution, and we now have an ordinance in place that any gun show that takes place on city property, and that means the TCC, everybody has to do a background check. That means private sales, it means licensed sales. Right now in the city of Tucson, it is legal to sell a firearm out of the trunk of your car in a parking lot for cash with no questions asked. That is state law. So we, as the chatter before the meeting started, was recognizing we have some challenges up north. So threading that needle, the gun preemption needle, has been a challenge. We do have a ban on selling magazines that hold over 10 rounds in the TCC. If you lose or have your gun stolen, we now have an ordinance in place that Tom Horn wanted to challenge us on, but then he left office before he got around to it. And that says that you have to advise the police within 24 hours of when you know that the gun's lost or stolen, so that we know there's a hot gun floating around in the community. We have another ordinance that Horn wanted to take us on over, and that Horn, by the way, is Brnovich's predecessor as AG. And that says that if the police suspect that you've been drinking while you're operating your gun, then we have a right to request a blood alcohol test. Coming on May 18th, I have a study session agenda item that simply says, the state legislature just passed HB 2111. It says that in the state of Arizona, we will no longer recognize federal gun laws. My resolution is going to say that in the city of Tucson, we will recognize federal gun laws. And if Brnovich wants to sue us over it, or if Ducey wants to sue us over it, then we'll meet you on the courthouse steps. I firmly believe that what the state is proposing in ignoring federal gun legislation is unconstitutional, and someone needs to hold their feet to the fire. So we're going to do that on May 18th if I can get the rest of the mayor and council support for that. I've already spoken to the city attorney on it, and when I described to him what the state legislature had done, I could hear his head hitting his desk in disbelief. That it's just they never cease to amaze. Another gun-related story that I'm really proud of having championed, Jenna Ayup. If you follow my newsletter, then Jenna's name will mean something to you. 8 years ago, Jenna was shot and killed by her live-in partner. The TPD investigation did not yield anything at the county attorney's office. The case was dropped. We picked it up here at the ward office about 3 years ago. went out and got a private investigator. We recreated the case, brought TPD back to our office here and presented him with pictures and all the facts of the case that frankly were botched. Long story made short is that we represented it to Barbara Lawal at the time, and there is now a court date. The shooter has been charged with indicted on manslaughter charges, and the court date is in Pinell County, September of this year. So it's a situation where it was a cold case, and now we've got a guy under indictment for shooting and killing his live-in. Another item that I'm proud of the work that I've done on is the Benedictine Monastery. It's right across the street from the ward office. The nuns sold a 6.2 acre property that did not have historic preservation protection on it. The way the zoning worked at the time was that the buyer could have come in, demolished the property, demolished the monastery, and sold it to an out-of-state student housing developer, and not without any public process whatsoever, built a student housing project on that site that would have housed, I believe it was 440 beds, student housing beds. We began a fairly contentious exchange with the owner. And actually here in the office, I said to him, if you are that guy who is responsible for demolishing the monastery and turning it into student housing, you will burn in hell. And that was the beginning of our exchange. We now have a very good relationship. Actually, it was sort of a game of chicken. I had the city council put a rezoning proposal on the table where we would rezone his property as an historic landmark. Now, I call it a game of chicken because, frankly, if he had sued us over that, he would have won 10 times out of 10, because it was us going and rezoning his property without his consent. But the discussion was, okay, his name is Ross Rowling. Okay, Ross, you can sue us. You'll be tied up in court for 2 or 3 years. You'll be writing checks. You'll wind up in the same place you are now. Why don't we have a reasonable conversation about preservation of the monastery and something other than student housing on it? That's where we wound up. We now have the monastery preserved. We have non-student housing. It'll be market rate apartments with a commercial element in the monastery itself. So it's not what I had preferred. Obviously, we would have preferred the 6-acre orchard that was there, but we preserved the monastery and in perpetuity, and he has agreed to put a historic landmark designation on it. While that work was going on, we worked out a deal with Ross to allow us to help over 20,000 migrants, asylum-seeking migrants, making their way through the city of Tucson. I got Catholic Community Services involved with Ross. And if you spent time in the monastery a couple of years ago, you saw families who were apprehended at the border. Border Patrol or ICE would bring them to the monastery. We would then make sure they had food, clothing, shelter, medical supplies, transportation. We made contact with their next of kin or their sponsors somewhere else in the country, and got them on a bus and got them moving in that direction. That work still goes on. You follow the news, you know that we've still got a border challenge. Last weekend, I exposed a $105 million price tag for the tent that DHS is proposing for the south side of Tucson. It is a grossly out of scale cost for something that we are doing with volunteers, and we continue to advocate. I'm involved in fairly regular meetings with DHS, Border Patrol, the county, Catholic Community Services, and other service providers to try and get them to offload that back into our laps so that we can take care of these people in a much more humane fashion than putting them in a tent with the summer heat coming on. Similarly, I worked with the Islamic Center of Tucson several years ago and continue, as I mentioned before we started, or as we started, continue that exchange with them about bringing them as a member of the community. While the center was being pelted with whiskey bottles and pumpkins from the student housing towers, actually worked to bring the community right into the center with TPD, with the U of A leadership, with UAPD, with the Islamic Center leadership, and with management from out of state who flew in for the meetings. There were 4 student evictions as a result, because we could identify the tower, the balconies where the things were being thrown from. We continue to have that relationship with the ICT, the Islamic Center of Tucson, and even to the point where when there was a shooting, and I don't remember exactly which one it was, God, we have so many of them, but they were being threatened with anti-Islamic sentiment, and so we held up right inside ICT when we had some of these nut jobs who were saying that they were going to go in and shoot the place up. So very fragile but fluid and successful relationship with our Muslim brothers and sisters here in the city. I mentioned the U of A. U of A and COVID was another issue that I got knee deep into, and the reality is that my willingness to advocate for the community when it comes to COVID and the U of A's response likely is what cost me my job, my 32-year career in the athletics department. The U of A, just brief history, was not inclined to require mandatory testing for students living off campus. They had about 600 students living on campus, and they did require testing for that. I said at the time, in person and in multiple exchanges with President Robbins, that he was responsible, the U of A was responsible for bringing 30,000 students into this community, and as a result of that, had a responsibility for mandating testing if they were going to be living out and outside the campus environment. His response was that they're in private dorms, we don't have any access to them. That's easy. I picked up the phone, called the management, and said, I want to bring some testing into your facilities. They welcomed it with open arms. Long story short is that now the U of A is doing mandatory testing. And the conversation now shifts to mandatory vaccinations when students come back in the fall. I've had this exchange with Robbins as well. They are sort of tiptoeing around that issue. But the reality is that the entire University of California system just announced that they're going to require vaccinations when they invite students back into their communities. At the time this was sort of crescendoing, I had a resolution in front of the city council that said we, the city, non-binding resolution, would request that the U of A engage in mandatory testing for all students living out in the community. During the week run-up to that vote, Robbins and some of his people made the rounds with the rest of the council and convinced them that that would be a bad look from a marketing standpoint. When he sent his guy to the council meeting to share their thoughts with us, he said it was both unconstitutional and pandering. It's neither unconstitutional nor pandering. The council voted that resolution down, but now the university is doing their mandatory testing. So a week later, by the way, they eliminated my position at the U of A. You guys can connect those dots. Another area that I've been heavily involved in is animal welfare. I am really proud to have been active and the tip of the spear in getting the Tucson Greyhound Park shut down. We also passed a ban on the administration of anabolic steroids for racing animals in Tucson. We demonstrated that they were doing that, and the health effects on the animals were just horrendous. Was also very active in one of the actually sane things that the state legislature has done in the last several years is they finally instituted a ban on killing contests in Arizona, and that's where they would advertise people to come in, and the more coyotes or more wildlife that you could bag, you would win prizes for it. Those are now banned in the state of Arizona as a result of our advocacy locally. And another animal-related item is we now have a ban, not we have a ban, but when we do controlled burns, fire department does controlled burns, we now require the Wildlife Rescue Center to be present, and so they can be doing advocacy and actually going in and making sure they're clearing the brush before the fire department goes in and does their burns. again, these are really important issues that are sort of off of people's radar screen, but it's one of the reasons that we're down here doing this work 7 days a week and multiple hours. Larry mentioned PFAS. Perfluorinated substances that are found in what's called AFFF, aqueous film forming foam. It's a firefighting foam that has been used out at Davis Mountain for years. I have documents that demonstrate that Davis Mountain admitted that when they were dispensing with the AFFF, they would either hose it into the soil or dump it diluted down into the sewer system. AFFF is PFAS is let me start that sentence again. AFFF is a purveyor of PFAS. PFAS is known as a forever chemical. It is absolutely implicated in all sorts of cancers. And they have known this since the 60s. Many of you will remember Rachel Carson and her books back in the 60s. At the time she was putting her books out, 3M and other manufacturers were putting PFAS out into the community through things like Teflon in our pans. But most importantly, it was being sold as a firefighting substance to military bases all over the world. I was able to demonstrate through Tucson water samples that we have significant plume, PFAS plume in our groundwater out by DM. I brought in a litigation team with our city attorney from New York. They're called Skolnick. I forget the entire name of the legal team. It doesn't matter for this purpose, but the short message is we are now suing 3M and other manufacturers of AFFF, of PFAS. And we are working with the Arizona Department of Environmental Quality and the Department of Defense right now, actively testing out around DM to control that plume, put in treatment facilities that are going to cost tens of millions of dollars. But right now we're getting our water largely from the CAP, from the Colorado River. We all know we're in a drought. We all know the CAP is not going to last forever. We all know that we're going to have to rely on groundwater at some point. So protecting and preserving the quality of our groundwater right now is critically important, so that when we do have to serve it, we're not serving PFAS infested water. And so that is a big deal. It's not something that doesn't have a lot of media sex appeal right now, but I'm not going to be that guy from Flint, Michigan, who turned a blind eye to our water situation in this community. And it's significant, and we're in litigation over it right now. So Larry, I can keep going. I can stop. I can talk about sex trafficking. I can talk about recycle, reuse, 5G cell poles. So you tell me if you want me to go another 5 minutes.
Well, I'll tell you what, let's open it up to questions. I know this is a curious crowd, and we do have one hand up already, and that is Jackie Romer. Go ahead with your question, Jackie.
My concern is always, is our electrical infrastructure stable enough to handle an outage for, let's say, 2 weeks in Tucson without people dying from the heat? Do we have, can we have cooling centers? I found out we don't have them. I'm amazed at your leadership. It must be your leadership qualities, because I've never heard so much accomplishment like this. I'm just impressed, but thanks. Okay.
You're correct. We do not have the infrastructure capacity right now to sustain a major long-term electrical grid outage. And I'm going to not dodge that question, but I want to pivot it into a conversation real quick, and I'll give you the Reader's Digest version about 5G, because it speaks specifically to TEP. But the expert on this call right now, and I don't pretend to know what I don't know, the expert on this call with respect to electrical grid infrastructure, heat resiliency, is Barbara Warren. I'm totally willing to let Barbara speak to that as well, but we don't have right now the capacity infrastructure that we need for long-term outages. That's a big deal. I have met with TEP. I'm going to talk about 5G real quickly. And they are not under our jurisdiction, and so we frankly have a challenge with respect to that. It affects our ability to deliver water, wastewater, and all the services that we provide through our 911 system. It is a huge issue. And so, I don't know, Barbara, do you want to give a short response to that as well for Jackie?
As I spoke earlier at the presentation I made, this is the responsibility of the Red Cross in case of a severe heat emergency, and their schools and libraries, and it's very unsatisfying to not understand really what would happen in case of an extreme heat emergency. I wonder if I could take this opportunity to also ask Steve a couple of questions.
Go right ahead.
Thank you, Steve, for all the incredible stuff you're doing. One question is, are you willing to or working on a process to protect outdoor workers with statutes from heat exposure, extreme heat exposure? I understand that's in the climate adaptation plan, but I think we've been waiting for years for that plan to be implemented, and we'd like to see outdoor workers protected by ways to keep them from having heat exhaustion, heat deaths. The other thing is, what's your position on the zoo?
So before Paul Durham had to step aside, he and I were actually working on that issue with respect to the heat and workers. And I'm very familiar, as a result of my project management background, with construction workers and people being out in the heat of the day. And so, yeah, we were on the edge of adopting something. Paul stepped aside, happy to keep it moving forward. It's not getting any cooler outside, and so, yeah, it's a totally legitimate issue. For me, the zoo question is pretty simple. We signed contracts three and 4 years ago with construction companies, with the Zoological Society, and for 3 straight years, this mayor and council have said, yes, move forward with the project. This is a credibility issue for me. It is, can the city of Tucson be trusted to stand by the contracts that they sign? And that answer has to be yes, or next time we go out and put a solicitation out for contract or construction work, and any of our Prop 407 work, our Prop 101 work, why would anybody bid on it? If they understand that 3 years from now, you might change your mind and pull the rug out from under us. I've been in touch with Lloyd Construction. I've known Bill Lloyd for years. He owns the company. He says they've got over $1 million invested in this right now, based on our votes. The city of Tucson has over $2.5 million already spent on this project over the last 3 years in testing, in plan and design. If we are to pivot right now to a new project, all of that money is gone. There will be a redesign cost for the new project that will be the least expensive one right now that's in front of us is $3.5 million. We will then have to look at the cost escalation for labor, for materials. Lumber went up last year 320%. PVC went up 23%. So labor, material escalation, and so all of this, and a delay on the rollout of the project. I've been in touch with the Zoological Society. They are doing significant damage control with their donors right now. I've had emails in the last week from donors saying, look, I gave $750,000 to that project because you guys said you were going to do it 3 years ago. I'm ready to go to a lawyer. Another one said, I've got $500,000 in it. I'll be damned if I'll ever write you guys a check again if you guys change your mind now. So, Barbara, I totally understand that this is a really sensitive issue in the community right now. And that's the reason what I proposed before we did the suspension of the contract, this lasted for the 45 days, was maintain our credibility, maintain our contracts, continue with this project, but create over to the north of the North Duck Pond a natural resource center that will have more trees, will be ADA accessible, will have multiple water features, and will maintain the credibility that we have right now out in the community with respect to when we sign contracts. This is really a heated issue. I've been following it for the last 45 days. I had a member of my staff on the community stakeholder group. I totally understand how people are upset about the Barnum Hill right now. But to me, if the city council had not voted for this 3 years consecutively, approving the zoo's capital budget request for this project, then we have the conversation about that we're having right now. But I have a serious concern about the city changing direction now. And I'll remind you that when we voted for this project back in 2018, it was our current mayor, who was a Ward 1 council member at the time, who made the motion. We delayed that motion for 2 weeks so she could study it even further. Now we're saying, wait, we changed our minds. So I get it. I understand the concern, but this is a simple matter to me is, can you trust us when we put our names on a contract? I think that the natural resource area that I had proposed is a win-win solution for the community. And I also understand that the Barnum Hill group is not going to be happy with that. So there's that. But I'm not dancing around the issue, you know, and that's how I feel about it. Jackie asked a question about that implicated TEP, and Larry, you mentioned 5G when we started, and so I want to, and they're related. 5G is a situation that we're in right now because the state legislature and the FCC have taken local voice out of site selection decisions for these 5G cell poles. Right now, the most active company in the city is Verizon, and they're active in Midtown. You'll see they're 35 feet tall. There's these steel poles with a 3-antenna array up at the top of them. And what the state legislature did was they said that, and the FCC, so it's both federal and state, is they drew the analogy to the 1960s space race, is that we got to be first. In the 60s, that we can't let Russia beat us to outer space. Now it's we can't let China beat us in this rollout of 5G infrastructure. And so they have passed legislation all over the country, but in the state of Arizona right now, that says local jurisdictions may not slow down the permitting process for these things. And so they've effectively tried to get us out of the way. One thing I've learned is that the telecom industry does not like bad press. And so I've tried to give this as much press as possible. Verizon is now at the table. AT&T, I had a Zoom call with them for the first time last week. They're at the table. TEP is now at the table. One thing that people don't know is that in state law, existing utility poles are a permitted use for these things. And so what TEP has been saying is that, well, we'll put our specs together. We'll require what's called a master licensing agreement, an MLA, which takes 9 months to a year to negotiate. And we'll work with the telecom companies. And oh, by the way, the city of Tucson is in a situation where if we don't award the permit for one of these poles within 75 days, it's assumed to have been approved. So while we've got a 75-day shot clock on us, TEP's slow walking this thing for 9 months and seeing these poles popping up all over the community. So what we have now is that I've got Verizon at the table saying that, and the city, frankly, the city has been a part of the problem as well, because our transportation department has not been allowing co-location on, for instance, if you got a stop sign, they were saying you can't put your pole in, we'll put our stop sign on your pole. It didn't comply with manual form of uniform traffic control devices, and I called bullshit on that. We're doing it. We weren't allowing them to co-locate on street lights. Now everyone's at the table, and it has been a slow and painful process, but TEP is negotiating an MLA with both AT&T and Verizon. TEP just 2 days ago finally agreed to a co-location on one of their utility poles over on the next to Doolin Middle School. Verizon is now talking with a group that I put them in touch with called ChemRock, and ChemRock produces those fake palm trees and cactus, and so you can hide one of these things in one of those. They're not beautiful, but they're not as ugly as a steel pole sitting in your front yard. The city of Tucson is putting a design manual together now saying that you can't put these things any more than 150 feet next to another vertical element. And the telecom industry is pushing back saying we can't live with that. The short message is, I guess it's not short, but the message is they're finally at the table. And we have, and the goal has not been, and I've said this to Verizon and AT&T and TEP, the goal is not to stop you from putting your poles up. because everybody on this call uses 5G. You've got a smartphone. So it's not about the technology. It's about where they go. And we're looking for multiple solutions. I want to be able to stand in an alley behind every one of your houses with a Verizon representative and TEP and look down that alley at all the utility poles and say, those are legitimate sites for your pole, not out in front of someone's house. And that's the conversation we're having now. And frankly, it's been a long time getting there. But it's another example of how these positions are highly complex, and getting through the game of 20 questions with providers is really wearying. When they know the question that they know the answer you're after, but unless you ask the specific question, no one's going to out the fact that there's not an MLA. No one's going to out the fact that they can't put it on our street lights or traffic control devices. So we're there. You're still going to see them. We still can't compel a location, but because of the press that they've been getting and will continue to get, there are some multiple solutions in play. What the Verizons of the world have been wanting to do is follow the path of minimal effort on their part. So you'll look up at the top of one of those and you'll see a 3 antenna array. For Verizon, it might mean, with my solution, it might mean you put one on a utility pole, one on a street light, and one on a stop sign. That's more work for them. They're now saying that they're willing to engage in that conversation. So I'm hopeful that we've kind of broken that egg and we'll be able to make something out of it going forward. So.
All right, we have a question from Susie Anderson, member of our board. Go ahead, Susie.
Thank you very much, Steve, for being here. It's so wonderful to hear all the information and about all the projects you're involved in. I'm so happy that you're on the council. My question is about the glass that we're collecting. I know there are some people who really are unhappy about having to take it to something that's a mile away, but I collect from neighbors and other people. I want to know how well that project is going. I'm so glad you started it. And the other thing is, are you using anything in the asphalt that's going on the new Broadway corridor that's adding something to the asphalt? Thank you.
So I'm glad you asked that, because I have a prop that I'm gonna show you in a second. But the glass crushing, if you came to the Ward 6 office now, I could walk you into our garage and you'd see the one bottle at a time glass crusher that I spent far too many nights crushing one beer or whiskey bottle at a time and walking into my house at 10 o'clock at night smelling like a brewery, and my wife not believing that, yes, I was at work. Trust me. So the glass crushing worked. We are now, in fact, you asked how successful. I started out with a little 10 by 10 foot by 10 foot bin out behind the ward office. People have so embraced this project that now I've got a 22-foot roll-off out there that they have to empty once a week. So people have totally bought into this. The purpose, so if you crush glass, it winds up being sand. It's silica sand. And there are multiple secondary uses in the market for the product. If you come to the ward office, all the concrete slabs out in front were made with concrete and the glass that I crushed in the garage. And I wanted to demonstrate to the city that, look, we can put this stuff to use. And so we've been using it to fill ruts in alleys. We've been using it as a concrete mix. We filled sandbag back in the olden days when it used to rain and we had monsoons. We were filling sandbags, and I had groups coming over here to the ward office with sandbags and filling them. And so it's been a successful program. It's climate conscious and it is fiscally responsible, because we were losing $3 million a year because there is no international market for glass right now. It's a very abrasive substance. It breaks down the machinery in the material recycle facility. I can validate that for you because it was wearing out the screen in the crusher I've got here. I had to have at least 3 times have the screen replaced. So yeah, it's very cool. It's moving forward. On May 4th, next Tuesday, I'm bringing to the study session another item. We're going from glass to plastic. And so hang on a second. I'm trying not to throw my back out. This looks like a big Lego, right?
Yeah.
It's made out of plastic. It's all recycled plastic. And so it's a company, and look at the top of it. I'm probably going to drop it on my keyboard. It looks like a Lego, right? You can see the little nubs at the top. I know you're all grandparents or none, so you know what Legos are. So that is a commercial grade block that we can use for construction. We have, and I didn't tip it over, but in the top you see 2 holes. There's no concrete involved. There's no mortar involved. They stack up like Legos, and the holes are for putting rebar in so you can lock them together. We have Prop 407 projects where we're putting up new restrooms in parks. We're rebuilding police stations and fire stations. We can cut our costs by recycling our plastic. And yes, single-use plastic bags work on this. The only kind of plastic that doesn't work is, you know, those crates, the milk crates that you get that are, you know, a half-inch thick. You can't use those. So the process is called Buyfusion. And the product, and if you turn into our council meeting next Tuesday, you'll see I've got representatives from this company who are going to make a presentation. And Buyfusion, the product is you heat up the plastic, it molds it into the shape of this block, and then spits it out, and you've got these blocks. We are running enough through our material recycle facility to buy a 90-ton quality Buyfusion machine and take the plastic out of the recycle process as well. So I'm really stoked about this. It's going to be very cool. The pushback I've gotten from city staff, and there always is that process, is how do you get city staff to agree, is that, well, we have a contract with Republic and they're selling this on the market, and so we're going to be taking a revenue stream away from them. And my answer to staff is no, they can participate because they can feed plastic into our, it's called a blocker machine, and they can feed their plastic into it too, and they can sell these things. And so this is really going to be cool. So we're gonna get, it costs about $1.3 million for the blocker machine, but by the money we will save in self-producing or self-performing on our own block for our Prop 407 projects, it'll pay for itself in not a heartbeat, in a while. Broadway Widening, Susie, I didn't want to skip that. They have looked into the rubberized asphalt on Broadway Widening. I understand that they are planning on using it, which will be a help. It's still asphalt, you know. I mean, it is what it is, but it's better than the non-rubberized. And in addition to that, it's better from the standpoint of sound attenuation. That product knocks down the sound as opposed to just the granulated asphalt that's being used. So anyway.
All right, we've got a question from Ryan Anderson. Please unmute yourself and go right ahead.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to say I really appreciate your service, Steve. Your diligence and your transparency is really second to none. But my question's about Tim Steller's piece on the reauthorization of the Regional Transportation Authority. I just wanted to get your thoughts on what he brought up in that piece. And if we are going to reauthorize the RTA, does it make sense to you to have weighted voting this time where city gets more representation since we generate most of the revenue through a much larger tax base? That's my question. Thank you.
Okay. And so I will answer the weighted voting piece, but there's more in addition to that. So we have been involved. I'm going to run out of time. I've got 8 minutes. Okay. We've been involved in some very fluid conversations with the RTA literally for months. They sent us a request for a project list. Now, just by way of real quick history, the 2006 RTA was a $2.1 billion half-cent sales tax that was going to last for 20 years. That's expiring in 2026. And so the RTA board, PAG, Pima Association of Governments, is in the process of of preparing a new, RTA next, RTA 2 to get back to the voters early enough so that they don't bump up against the expiration of the current one. And so that's the reason that we're in 2021 now. It's timely, and so the conversation's happening. We have told the RTA that there are several components to what they are to this current structure that don't make sense for the city of Tucson if it goes forward in its current structure. One is weighted voting. There are 9 member jurisdictions in the PAG: the city of Tucson, Pima County, the tribes, Sahuarita, Oro Valley, Marana, some that I'm forgetting, South Tucson. We are by far the biggest contributor to the tax base in the RTA. There's no reason that the city of South Tucson or Sahuarita ought to have the same level of vote that we get when we're talking about spending our tax dollars to support these projects. So that's one thing. Secondly, they sent us a request for a project list, and they sent it to all the jurisdictions. And they said, we're going to cap your project list at $600 million, everybody. And so we said, there's no reason that when we're providing nearly half the tax base, that we ought to have the same level of project list that Sahuarita have. I mean, that's just nuts. So the weighted voting, the project, the level of the project list. In addition to that, some of the elements that are included in the current RTA don't make sense for us going forward. They were very heavy. Of the $2.1 billion, 1.2 of it was for nothing but road expansion, was creating the Broadway expansion, the Grant Road expansion, widening our roadways. We know that the traffic counts are going down. We know that people are using mass transit more. We know that we don't need to keep widening roads. And so what we've told them is we want more safety elements like hawk lights. We want more pedestrian-friendly elements like protected bike lanes, those kinds of things. And we want to see that included in the RTA 2 package. And finally, back in 2012-ish, I got into a relatively major pissing contest with the then RTA board saying that you guys don't have road repair in your package. You're building wider roads, but you're not putting any dollars in it for pavement preservation. And so at the time they said Kozachik trying to blow up the RTA, and it got this big, negative pushback. Now, son of a gun, they're talking about putting pavement preservation in the next RTA package. So Ryan, there are lots of moving pieces to that. While we're having that conversation with the PAG board and the RTA, saying we want these elements included, we are on our own, City of Tucson, moving forward with what's called our Move Tucson program. And that's our own 20 potential 20-year transportation plan. And if we can't come to agreement with the PAG board, I think they think we're playing chicken with them and crossing our fingers behind our back and not serious, but they really ought to take us seriously, because I'm not going to be supporting reauthorization of a half-cent sales tax if we're still overly subsidizing Marana and Sahuarita and the tax base in this community aren't getting taken care of. We can put out to our own voters our own Move Tucson plan and our own tax plan on the heels of Prop 101 expiring and say, we'll do this ourselves. And you guys out in the outer region, you guys figure it out. So I don't want to sound confrontational, but you know what? We're writing the check. We ought to have a bigger seat at the table.
All right, we've got a couple more questions for you, Steve. One is from Lucy Messing. Lucy, go ahead and ask your question.
Thank you. Sorry, I came on late. I had a previous engagement, so I don't know if you mentioned anything about the involvement of the city with the preschool initiative or action and helping with the childcare. Can you just expand on that just a little, please?
Yeah.
Thank you.
I'll be real brief because we're running out of time. But yes, Lucy, I haven't polled everybody on the council, but I've worked with them long enough to know that we recognize that as a absolute need. We have put CARES dollars into childcare, into KidCo, into preschool education. I've met with Penelope Jacks and also some of the members of Southern Arizona Leadership Council who opposed the proposition back when the tax was on the ballot. I think it was Prop 208, whatever the number was, and it was voted down. And so what we've done is I didn't bring them together, but I'm participating with them at the table saying, how can we represent the concept to the voters again in a way that is palatable, so you don't have this sort of bifurcating the education community and having the business community say, we don't want the extra tax, but getting people to the table to recognize that high quality preschool education is a precursor to successful outcomes later on in people's educational careers. And so let's find a way to make it work next time we take this to the voters. In the meantime, nonprofits and some of the education community advocates are working together to advance the conversation. County has put in a bunch of money into it. The city put some money into it as well. And so yes to the concept. It's what does it look like going back to the voters?
Steve, I understand you have to be somewhere else in 2 minutes. Is that right? Or can you stay on for some more questions?
I can stay on for a bit.
Okay, great. We have a question from Steve Mizell. Steve, go ahead, and you're unmuted. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you for this excellent Zoom meeting. Got a lot of information and very granular, which is very appreciated. So my question, though, is not in the granular sense and nitty-gritty. It's more of a future kind of a question. I find it really amazing that a city of over 1 million people, it's easier to get from any city on the East Coast to London, Paris, Rome, than it is to get to Tucson. And so I believe that we need to attract people and enable people from the East Coast, up and down the coast, to be able to come visit Tucson, fall in love with Tucson, and then become a part of the tax base of Tucson. And so I would like to know what, if anything, the council is doing in a serious way, working with the airport people, working with airlines to encourage, and with businesses here who certainly would benefit from an influx of money, and the Democratic Party probably attracting a lot of, let's say, liberals from the East to Tucson. I'd like to know what in a serious way is being done to get this accomplished.
Okay. I will tell you one of the most important areas of this community that we have, it's our ace in the hole, 2 aces in the hole. That I have been working with Pima County, City of Tucson, Port of Tucson, that's the rail hub out by the air base, not by the air, out by the airport. We have an absolute ace in the hole called the Sonoran Corridor that connects I-10 and I-19. It would, as we get that built out, it will improve air cargo traffic, rail traffic, over-the-road traffic, interstate traffic, our international connection with Mexico, which is a huge issue from a standpoint of economic development. And the Sonoran Corridor build-out is something that we have that nobody else in the state has. There is not, and that's the area out by the airport and by the Port of Tucson. As soon as, and we have ADOT at the table, Arizona Department of Transportation, for funding, for helping to connect those corridors. County administration is absolutely at the table. So, Steve, that is probably the best example of a multi-jurisdictional collaboration that has to happen. There is not another economic boon opportunity that this region has that's sitting waiting to just bubble up, and it's going to take all of us working together. So the conversation about PAG was one thing. This is a conversation about multi-jurisdictional cooperation for the economic well-being of this community. The second thing, the second ace in the hole that we have that we are going to require some give from the state legislature on again is the film industry. And just last week, I was sharing emails with people from the Visit Tucson Film Office where we have a real opportunity to bring in a major HBO production, but we're competing with New Mexico, the state of New Mexico, who has a 35% 25% tax incentive to attract the film industry. Our state legislature hasn't got that. I sat in a room with Jonathan and Andy Biggs, God bless me, several years ago when he was still in the state legislature, and argued with him about, look, this is a targeted tax increase that will create, you're all about jobs creation. This is catering, it's transportation, it's film set, it's design, it's it's post-production, it's selling what we have as an environment where you can go out in the Sonoran Desert and half an hour later you're up on top of Mount Lemmon and you've got multiple sets, multiple venues that you can use, and we can sell it, but we're getting outbid by the states around us that are offering film tax incentives. So those are two examples that I think that I'm going to continue to try and exploit, but they're hanging out there waiting for multi-jurisdictional cooperation.
All right, a couple more questions.
Steve, this is Trace English.
Hi, Trace.
I thought I'd ask about transportation. The regional transportation plan has a price tag of $32 billion over the next 25 years. And PAG says we've got $17 billion from all sources. At the same time, so we're $15 billion short. At the same time, the county has introduced their first transportation impact fee at the beginning of last year, and it explicitly excludes any charges for roads inside of the city. Do you know when this RTA2 election has been scheduled, or has it been? And do you have any thoughts about the county refusing to collect any money from new development for roads inside the city limits?
This sort of circles back to Ryan's question from a couple of minutes ago, and it speaks to the entire RTA2 plan. I mentioned real briefly the Grant Road widening. Grant Road widening is in 3 phases. They've done phases 1 through 4, and they don't have money for phases 5 and 6. That's the donut hole between so the Grant Road widening goes from Miracle Mile out to Swan. And they've done the Miracle Mile piece, they've done the Swan piece, but they don't have money right now for this segment between Mountain and Palo Verde, the Campbell Grant area. And so what they're doing now is they're talking about chiseling off other projects and reallocating dollars back so they can fund this. And so this whole notion of promises made, promises kept, you're value engineering aesthetic elements out of these projects. And in fact, they're talking about kicking some of the city of Tucson projects into the first phase of the next RTA plan. And so that's another reason this is not a palatable option. So back to your point, Tris, the county has instituted, and I'm not sure if this is exactly what you're talking about, but the county has instituted a policy called PAYGO, where they are charging the city of Tucson. They're artificially keeping city of Tucson property taxes high and using the delta between where it would be and it is to pay road repair out in Pima County. We're paying for it, but we're not getting the benefit. It's one of the reasons that we got into an arm wrestling match over some recent, city county, the water rate differential conversation is the look. We already have rate differentials between the city and the county, so let's not talk as if that doesn't exist. There is no scheduled RTA election yet. My understanding is that they would like to get it on the ballot next year in 22, which is it's a sprint given the differences that we have right now between us.
All right, Steve, we have one final question. There's more questions than we can handle, but we've gone over time. So let's close out with Jeannie Christie, who is a member of our board. Jeannie, go ahead.
Hey, Steve. Even though I live in the county, I've been a fan of yours since 2009, 2010. Thank you for everything you do. My question is, I'm not totally up on the recycling thing. I live in the county. Does the ban on recycling glass include county people, or is it strictly the city of Tucson?
Are you serviced by City of Tucson?
No.
Okay, no, then it doesn't affect you. We have glass as a commodity that can be recycled. What we have chosen to do is, because it was costing us, like I said, over $3 million to pay Republic for processing it with no market. We have taken it out of the recycle stream and we're collecting it right now, and we will crush it ourselves and we will put it to a good secondary use. If the county, if Republic, if any of the other providers, Diggins or whoever they are, want to join us in that, that would simply give us more capacity and just more product. I had somebody from the 4th Avenue Merchants Association reach out to me a few weeks ago and say, hey, can you use some of that sand to put in our sidewalks down, because they're having some construction done on the avenue. And so those are the kinds of projects that, you know, that we ought to be using this stuff for, not just dumping it into a landfill. And finally, I would say that we know that less than, what's the percentage? I think it's 40%. And that might even be high. I think it's something 40% of the glass that is used in the region is being recycled. Most people are throwing it into the trash can anyway. Most of it's not being recycled. So no, you're not affected by that, but you're certainly welcome to bring your whiskey bottles down to the Ward 6 office and we'll get them down and get them crushed for you.
Thank you. That would be wine bottles. Thank you.
Okay. They work too.
All right, folks, we're going to have to call this meeting to a close. We've gone over time, but I wonder if you could wrap up our meeting. Tell us how people can support you if they're interested to do so, and what's the best way to get in touch with you and find out information about your activities.
Okay, well, I'm totally accessible. Email me directly, or you can email Ward 6. As far as the campaign is concerned, I am not taking financial donations. I didn't do it in 17. I'm not doing it again this time. If you have money sitting on your counter that you would like to support something with, give it to a local business, buy a local business, go out to eat, or support a local nonprofit. Everybody talks about wanting to take money out of politics. I'm walking that talk. You all know me. I'm not going to hide for the next couple of months as we get close to the primary. And so I don't think there will be any question as to what I'm doing, what I stand for. And so I don't need you to put money into my pocket in order to help get that message out. Got a Facebook page, got the email, but you're gonna be seeing plenty of me. I'm not going into hiding for the next couple of months.
Well, Steve, we want to thank you so much for your time and really appreciate your answering all of the questions at today's meetings.
Appreciate the invitation. And what can you do to support me? Vote in the primary and vote for me in the primary.
That's a pretty clear message.
There you go.
And so thanks again for being here on behalf of Democrats of Greater Tucson. Look forward to seeing you out and about in the city. And I invite everybody to come back to our next meeting of Democrats of Greater Tucson, Mondays at noon. Thanks very much, and so long, everybody.